Vera sat on a bench in the hospital park and could not hold back her tears. It was the middle of April, a wonderful time of year, fresh, just bloomed leaves, gentle sun, a pleasant light breeze filled with the aromas of warmed earth. Vera loved spring very much. Now she could walk and walk, enjoy the good weather, make plans for the summer, but she was sitting near the hospital building and sobbing. It's good that at least there is no one around, so I can give free rein to my feelings. Fyodor, beloved husband, the man who accepts Vera and understands her like no one else. He is now there, in the intensive care unit. Just 6 months ago, he was a strong, healthy man, reliable as a rock. Next to him, all problems seemed like a trifle. Vera knew that her husband would do everything for her. He could move mountains, get the moon from the sky. He gave her a sense of safety, security, made her laugh when Vera was sad, said the right words of support if his wife needed encouragement. They were like the halves of a whole. It sounds banal, of course, but it is true. It seemed that Fyodor could read Vera's thoughts. And even now, lying on a hospital bed, all entangled in sensors and wires from IVS, he was still trying to support Vera. "It's okay, we'll get through it," Fyodor said today when he noticed that his wife was about to burst into tears. Vera was holding on, of course. The last thing he needed was for Fyodor to spend his last strength trying to calm his wife down. But he saw right through her, and of course he understood all her feelings perfectly well. "We'll get through it. It's unlikely." Fyodor knows the details of his diagnosis only in general terms, but Vera is constantly in touch with his attending physician, Professor Astafyev, a luminary of modern medicine. Vera's parents used all their connections to ensure that their son-in-law was treated by him. When everything worked out, it seemed that the worst was behind them. Now Fyodor is in good hands. But doctors, even the best of them, are not gods and cannot perform miracles. And only a miracle could help Fyodor. It was painful for Vera to see her husband like this. Pale, exhausted, with shadows under his eyes. Even his voice had changed. It had become weak, barely audible. And with each passing day, the condition of this still very young man was getting worse. If at first Vera hoped that everything would work out, now, "Get ready," Professor Astafyev said just a couple of days ago. "The disease is progressing rapidly. Supportive therapy is becoming less and less effective. Vital signs are deteriorating. There is still no response from the donor bank. And, apparently, there will be none. The queues there are huge. Unfortunately, there is a high risk that Fyodor will not wait. He needs an urgent operation, but there is no donor. An urgent operation. He has not visited doctors at all. Since childhood, he has been in excellent health. Even colds and flu have passed him by. Tall, athletic, energetic, strong and hardy. Fyodor sometimes half-jokingly assumed that his parents were Siberians with excellent health. Vera, looking at her husband with his thick blonde hair, wide white-toothed smile, beautiful clear skin, I couldn't help but think about what wonderful children they would have. Fyodor's genetics were obviously not bad, although it was impossible to say anything about this for sure, because Vera's husband did not know his parents. Fyodor grew up in an orphanage. Yes, in an orphanage. Within government walls among complete strangers. When the boy grew up enough to start asking questions about his past, the teachers at first brushed him off. Then one nanny finally enlightened the boy. It turned out that Fyodor's mother had abandoned him right in the maternity hospital. It seems that she was a drinking woman. Tall, stately, even beautiful, but fallen. At home, this lady already had several children, a little less, whom she needed to somehow feed and support. But there was no husband in the family. That's why Fyodor's mother decided that she could not handle another child. Well, she wrote a refusal. She told the staff at parting that perhaps this was the best thing she could do for her son, because there was a chance that he would be translated from Russian to English. WWW. Online adoptransler. Combe adopted into a family, even though he was still very young. But Fyodor was never adopted into a family. It was a difficult, unstable time, and few children were adopted at that time. And the birth rate had dropped sharply. People survived as best they could. That's how Fyodor grew up in an orphanage. He sometimes told Vera about his childhood. He spoke deliberately cheerfully, recalled some funny stories, and often mentioned his friends. Fyodor did not feel sorry for himself, did not complain about his fate. It was not in his character. In general, He preferred to look at life with optimism, and yet Vera understood that her loved one had a hard time. Some small details of his stories, they gave away a difficult childhood. For example, sweets that were divided among all the children. Each got only one candy, no more was expected. Or the attitude of embittered nannies towards children. Well, and punishment, of course. Not to mention the fact that Fyodor, unlike her, the beloved and only daughter of caring parents, had absolutely no one to confide his experiences to, no one to receive support from. It would seem that a person who grew up in such cold should himself be indifferent, inattentive, detached. But Fyodor, he became completely different. Vera had never met a more sensitive and kind person. They met by chance. Vera was studying at the economics department of the local university. The students had just passed a difficult session. The girls from Vera's group decided to celebrate this event in a club, dance, have fun, relax after intense studies. Vera looked great that day and knew it very well. A light flowing dress, emphasizing the graceful lines of the figure and revealing long slender legs, loose light brown hair, exquisite makeup. A photo model and nothing more. Vera liked herself. She caught the glances of those around her, which served as obvious proof of her attractiveness. And it was wonderful. That evening, the girlfriends danced a lot, laughed, joked, met guys. Someone invited one or another of Vera's classmates to dance. But Vera was unlucky. The first time a man of unpleasant appearance, about 30 years old, approached her, or even older. The girl smiled sweetly at him and refused under some plausible pretext. Then a young man with an arrogant face tried to drag her onto the dance floor. It felt as if he was doing the girl a big favor by approaching her. No, Vera didn't want to be in the company of such guys at all. It was better to chat with girls. But attention, male attention, was still nice. And then, closer to the end of the evening, Fyodor, came up to the table where Vera suddenly found herself alone at that moment. Such a nice guy. A gray t-shirt, worn jeans, sneakers, slightly tousled thick blonde hair, beautiful green eyes, a charming, albeit slightly embarrassed smile. And somehow Vera was immediately drawn to him, to this guy. She smiled at the young man. He, encouraged by this, sat down at the table. "May I?" he clarified, having already settled down opposite the girl. Yes, she nodded. And she smiled again. Of course, you could pretend to be a princess, as girls do. Let's start the game. Charm me if you can. Why? This guy behaved so simply and naturally that Vera didn't want to play. And he was so attractive, he had such a special aura. The girl liked being around him. "My name is Fyodor, and may I know your name?" "Vera," the girl answered honestly. "It's a beautiful name." "I don't know anyone with that name." "It's in honor of my grandmother," Vera clarified. "And by the way, your name is interesting too. I don't know anyone with that name." They talked a little more. No awkwardness, no tension. It felt like they had known each other for many years. And then Vera's girlfriends returned to the table. Fyodor greeted them. The girls started exchanging glances and giggling. Everything was as usual. Only the young man was not at all embarrassed. To Vera's surprise, he did not even linger his gaze on Elena's cleavage, and there was definitely something to show. No guy could resist her obvious advantages. But Fyodor, it seemed that for him there was only one faith. He looked at her, did not take his eyes off his new acquaintance. This even made Vera's head spin a little. The girl knew that she was very pretty, slender, tall, with regular features. But no one had ever looked at her with such admiration. A slow composition began to play. Fyodor invited Vera to dance. They finally clung to each other on the dance floor to the sounds of a touching melody. The guy did not allow himself anything unnecessary. Vera felt his warmth and strength. She literally dissolved in these pleasant sensations. She wanted him to hold her like this, forever. The girl greedily inhaled Fyodor's scent. Vera liked absolutely everything about her new acquaintance. She did not yet know who he was, what he did, where he worked or studied. But she already understood the main thing. He was a reliable and very kind person. Next to him, she felt like a fragile, graceful creature. It seemed that he knew exactly what to do, and she only needed to follow him. And then the melody ended. Fyodor smiled at the girl and thanked her for the dance. "I need to step away for a bit," the guy said, walking Vera to her table. "A friend called. He needs help." But I'll be back. Please wait for me. The main thing is, don't disappear anywhere. Don't hope. I won't disappear, Vera joked. The evening continued. The girlfriends vied with each other to share their impressions of the club and new acquaintances. Vera seemed to be listening to them, smiling, even inserting some remarks where necessary. But all this was no longer important or interesting to her. She was waiting for Fyodor. I wish this wonderful guy would come back soon. Let him embrace her again while dancing or look at her with that look of his. Only Fyodor for some reason was in no hurry to join them at the table. He was nowhere to be seen. At first, Vera was worried, then she began to get angry. In the end, the girl came to the conclusion that her new acquaintance had simply met someone else. Some girl whom he was currently charming. A typical club ladies' man, I guess. It was strange, but Vera felt jealousy and anger at these thoughts, surprisingly considering that at that point she had only known Fyodor for about half an hour. They hadn't even exchanged phone numbers. And he hadn't promised her anything. Well, you can't command your heart, as they say. What? Has your boyfriend disappeared? Christina asked sympathetically, apparently noticing the sadness in her friend's eyes. And you liked him, right? No, Vera lied. Nothing special about him. A guy, a million of them. That's right, Alenka praised. There are many of them, and you're the only one who's such a queen. Let's go to a bar on Nevelskaya. Everything is quiet here, and there it's in full swing. Alyona was the most experienced party girl in their student group. She knew many places in the city where you could have a good time. The others accepted her offer with enthusiasm. Everyone, except Vera. She was still hoping and waiting. What if Fyodor would come back? What if some circumstances prevented him from coming on time? Well, that was stupid. It was stupid to wait for a guy you barely knew who seemed to have completely forgotten about your existence. And you didn't want to break away from your friends at all. The girls called a taxi, and a cheerful flock poured out onto the porch of the club. It was already very late, and it seemed like it was starting to rain. The car pulled up, the girlfriends got in. The driver quickly drove them along the deserted streets to the bar. The first person Vera saw when she got out of the car was Fyodor. The girl couldn't even believe her eyes at first. We didn't even exchange phone numbers, the guy said, coming closer. When I realized that, and then saw that you were no longer there, it was like ice water had doused me. I was so scared that I would never see you again. And how did you find us? The bright, noisy Alenka burst into the conversation. I ran out onto the porch and saw you loading into a taxi. I caught a ride and followed you, the guy explained. Vera smiled. No one had ever done such a thing for her, just like in the movies. So what are you doing? Going to the bar with us or what? Alenka clarified. Fyodor looked questioningly at Vera. Or what? She answered her friends. We'd rather take a walk. Fyodor beamed. The girls, understanding, smiled. As you wish, said Christina. But when you get home, be sure to write to me, understood? Vera nodded. She knew that the responsible Christina was worried about her, and she had specifically asked Vera now, in front of a strange guy, to tell her when she would return home, so that the young man would know that he was being monitored and would not think of doing anything bad. They walked around the city at night, holding hands. They didn't want to part at all. They talked about everything and nothing, and sometimes they were just silent. Words. They weren't needed at that moment. Fyodor kissed Vera right near her house. Her head was spinning. She had been waiting for this moment for so long. But Fyodor couldn't bring himself to do it. In general, he behaved very carefully with her, as if he was afraid of scaring her. I thought for a long time before approaching you, the guy admitted that evening. I've been watching you for a long time. I saw how you turned everyone down, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. I thought you'd send me away politely too. And how am I supposed to live with that? Fyodor and Vera started dating. The girl learned a lot about this young man, and some details of his life initially shocked her. It turned out that Fyodor grew up in an orphanage. He had never seen his parents and didn't even know who his father and mother were. Vera couldn't get her head around it. How could you survive without the support and care of your mom and dad? But Fyodor survived. And not only survived, but also did very well. The boy, unlike most of the children in the orphanage, devoted a lot of time to studying. I understood that otherwise I would have no chance in life, Fyodor shared his memories with Vera. Seeing the zeal of the diligent student, the teachers helped him, guided him, taught the boy additionally, encouraged him. The boy was very grateful to them for this, especially to his physics teacher. Fyodor dreamed of becoming rich and famous, and of course, visiting the caring teacher afterwards to thank this good man. Fyodor, with his honors certificate, easily entered a prestigious college of economics and computer science. Here he quickly became one of the best students. At the same time, the boy began to earn extra money, taking small orders over the internet. He saved money. He understood that after graduating from the orphanage he would need them. After all, Fyodor had no one to help him in this life. He had to rely only on himself. Then Fyodor graduated from the orphanage, received an apartment from the state, as a complete orphan. The apartment was located in a new house in a good area. But these were only walls. It's good that Fyodor managed to save up a year of study for repairs. At that time, the guy was already working in a large IT company. He was planning to enter a university to get a higher education and move up the career ladder. But he kept putting it off, since in addition to his main job, he also had many part-time jobs that he did not want to quit. The guy needed money. He needed a safety net. This was the only way he could feel calm. Fyodor was the same age as Vera, but he had already experienced so much, knew so much about the world and about life, that he seemed to the girl to be a wise adult. He had to grow up early to worrying about providing for his existence. Vera was still supported by her parents. She felt like she was her mother and father's girl. And Fyodor, this guy had already achieved a lot. He knew how to make money, he knew how to save money, could cope with everything on his own. He exuded strength and confidence. Fyodor knew exactly what he wanted from life. This could not but arouse respect. At the same time, Fyodor was very kind and sensitive, and he needed love and acceptance. Vera felt this. He did not receive enough attention in childhood, and now he valued sincere feelings and good disposition. Fyodor was so different from all the guys Vera had known. The girl thanked fate for their chance meeting at the club. When Vera graduated from university, Fyodor proposed to her. It was not such a surprise for the girl. And for her parents too. Yes, Fyodor had known Vera's parents for a long time at that time. Both the girl's mother and her father liked him very much. Such a handsome and good guy, and such a difficult fate, the mother sighed. Well, God grant that everything will be fine for him now. The boy has done a lot for this. He is not a boy anymore, a real man, the father objected. I respect such people. Young, but already knows what he wants. He will achieve a lot. Vera and Fyodor got married. They flew on a honeymoon. It turned out that the guy had been saving money for all these events for a long time, so the holiday was just right. The newlyweds began to live together in Fyodor's apartment. They didn't have a moment of getting used to each other. Everything went somehow easily and naturally. Vera, a homegirl, didn't know how to do much around the house. Fyodor never reproached her for this with a word or a look. He took on many household chores. Vera watched her husband's dexterous and confident movements and learned little by little. She also wanted to take care of her beloved. Vera even liked cooking. In her family, the kitchen was her mother's domain. No one except her was allowed to the stove. Vera had no idea that it was so interesting to create dishes from a set of products. Real creativity. Fyodor praised his young wife's cooking, even if the dish was clearly not a success. It was burnt or oversalted. It was both funny and sweet at the same time. The couple lived, as they say, in perfect harmony. They had so many plans for life. Buying a new, more spacious apartment, traveling and, of course, having heirs. Fyodor, who spent most of his life alone, dreamed of a large family. Would you mind having many children? He asked half-jokingly. First we'll have a son, then a daughter, then another son, then twin girls. What's the difference? We'll just have lots and lots of children, 5 or 6. It's not enough. I, for one, dream of 10. Can you handle us? I can move mountains, but I can handle it. The couple, of course, were joking. But both of them really dreamed of children. Vera looked at her handsome husband and thought that their kids would be simply wonderful. Strong, healthy, cute. Most importantly, they would be loved and desired. Fyodor, he's the best potential father you can imagine. He definitely won't avoid communicating with his offspring and dump all the worries on his wife, No, this will be a loving, attentive, involved dad who will help you learn your lessons, come up with interesting games, and support you in difficult times. The couple dreamed of children. Two at first, then how it goes. But the desired pregnancy did not happen. 2 years passed after the wedding, and the family remained childless. Vera's friends got married one after another and announced that they were about to have babies. Then they became mothers and invited them to Christina's and their children's first birthdays. Vera was happy for them, of course, but it was also painful for her to look at other people's happiness. "You need to get checked out," Fyodor said one day. "I can see how you're suffering. We'll both go to the doctor, find the cause, and everything will be fine." Vera, of course, had thought about it too, but for some reason she was afraid. Since childhood, she had been afraid of clinics and people in white coats. What a coward! Fyodor turned out to be absolutely healthy, but Vera had serious problems. "Your diagnosis is bad," the doctor said, looking Vera in the eyes. "It's not life-threatening, but natural motherhood. It's impossible in your case. You can try IVF, but even then the chances are slim." Vera cried that evening on her husband's shoulder. He consoled her, stroked her back and hair. "Why are you so upset? The doctor said we could try IVF, so we'll try it if you want. If not, we'll take a child from an orphanage." "I want my own," Vera sobbed. "Ours, so he looks like you." "It doesn't matter," Fyodor assured. "A child is a child." But they did IVF anyway. The first attempt was unsuccessful, and the second one too. Then, finally, the test showed 2 stripes. Short-lived joy and a miscarriage. Again, preparation for IVF, again hopes, again disappointments. All this took 3 long, painful years. Vera was nervous. Her health was shaken by endless medical procedures. But the woman stubbornly went towards her goal. She really wanted a child. She painted bright pictures in her head. Fyodor takes their own baby in his arms, warm, screaming, alive. This scene stood before her eyes. Vera must give Fyodor a son. She simply must. Her husband does so much for her. He loves her so much, understands, and supports her so much. He is her support and hope. Is it really possible that she will not be able to make his cherished dream come true? "Enough," Fyodor said softly but decisively. This happened after another IVF attempt had failed. Vera was afraid to even count the number. But the woman was taking pills again, preparing for the next procedure. "What is enough?" Vera did not understand. "Stop ruining your health. You need to take a break from all this." "How so?" "Very simple. You stop taking these pills of yours. We just live, enjoy life, and don't think about each other." A tempting prospect. Vera herself was already tired of these hopes and worries, of endless medical manipulations and tests. But what about the child? "But you dreamed of a big family." "Even more, I dream of a happy life with the person you love, with you. I want you to be happy. But you're wearing yourself out with all this. It's time to stop." "What about the children?" "You can always take babies from an orphanage. But there are children of alcoholics and even worse there. Who knows what kind of genes they have?" "What about me? I'm from an orphanage too," Fyodor reminded. "Okay, if you don't want someone else's child, I'm not insisting. But I won't let you cripple yourself anymore either." Vera was even glad that her husband had made this difficult decision for both of them. It was as if Fyodor had relieved her of responsibility for the future of their family, taking everything completely upon himself. And it was like that in everything. Strong, decisive, wise. Vera trusted him more than anyone else. Fyodor is a protector, a keeper, a provider. She thought it would always be like this. But it turned out differently. Trouble came from where they least expected it. It all started with the fact that Fyodor, a man always full of energy, suddenly began to tire quickly. He came home from work and went straight to bed, to the TV. For most people, this was nothing special, but not in Fyodor's case. He was always boiling with energy. After work, he usually either repaired something, or took orders on the internet, or took Vera out for a walk. The man did not shy away from household chores. He always found something to do in his free time. Clean out the pantry or the balcony, clean the plumbing, cook a restaurant-quality dinner. Fyodor was always busy. He did not tolerate idleness and laziness. And then, at first, Vera was even irritated by this. She did not want her husband to become like the husbands of most of her friends. Work, kitchen, sofa. Then Fyodor began to get even more tired. Now he literally crawled home from work, pale, out of breath, completely exhausted. His appetite worsened. The man began to lose weight quickly. And then these bruises appeared on the body, appearing for no apparent reason. "You need to see a doctor," Vera firmly told her husband. "And don't make excuses. I've already made an appointment for you with a therapist. Just try not to go." "Thank you," Fyodor smiled. "I won't even think of running away. I was already planning to." Vera was worried about her husband, but she was sure that nothing terrible was happening to him. She thought that the doctors would now find some kind of vitamin deficiency, prescribe vitamins, regular walks. Maybe they would fly somewhere to the sea, relax, and everything would be fine. But the diagnosis sounded almost like a death sentence. The couple were not ready to hear this. It turned out that Fyodor had developed a rare autoimmune blood disease. The strong man's body was destroying itself. The worst thing was that there was no cure for it. Fyodor was prescribed treatment, but the doctor immediately warned that the result would be weak and short-lived. Fyodor needed additional examination. The life of the young family changed dramatically. All plans, all hopes, all dreams suddenly became distant and unimportant. Even the impossibility of becoming parents no longer seemed so fatal. Fyodor's life was under threat. And Vera, she no longer wanted to imagine a world without this man. Vera's parents were horrified when they heard their son-in-law's diagnosis. Both loved Fyodor very much. They even considered him the son they never had. The father turned all his acquaintances upside down and ensured that Professor Astafyev himself took his son-in-law into account. Vera then thought that now Fyodor would definitely be cured. She even cried with relief when her father told her the good news over the phone. Only later did it become clear that it was too early to rejoice. Fyodor's condition was worsening. He did not leave the hospital, spending all his days at home. The man's strength was so low that sometimes he couldn't even get to the computer, to his workplace. Fyodor still tried to earn extra money by taking orders on the internet, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to do. The man's mood was more than optimistic, as always. He still tried to joke, even managed to make fun of his own condition. Fyodor did everything to bring a smile to his wife's face. "Don't worry so much. I hardly ever got sick as a child. My immunity is great, and I'll pull through now." "That's the thing. The immune system is strong," Vera sighed. "In our situation, it works against you." Vera searched for information on the internet, sought consultations with doctors who work with such diagnoses. She even sent the test results to her husband abroad to get the opinion of another professor of medicine. She fought for her loved one. He also took the treatment seriously. He patiently endured painful and exhausting procedures, took medications on time. He really wanted to live. Fyodor had so many plans, so many desires. He was not going to give up. Professor Astafyev tried an experimental treatment. At first, it seemed to give a result. His hope was dashed. But then the disease attacked Fyodor with redoubled force. The man was hospitalized. Vera cried in the evenings in an empty apartment. Her parents offered to move in with them for a while, but the woman refused. She slept on half of Fyodor's bed, covered herself with his blanket, carried his things around the house, and cried a lot. Vera didn't want her parents to see her in such a state. They were very worried about their son-in-law, and now there was their daughter, who was hysterical. No way. Every day after work, Vera visited her husband. She held on and smiled in front of him, but it was getting harder and harder to hold on. Fyodor was changing rapidly. His old clothes hung on him like a sack, and they had to buy him new clothes, several sizes smaller. His facial features became sharper. His eyes now seemed incredibly huge on his emaciated, high-cheekboned face. It was painful to watch all these metamorphoses. But Fyodor, despite the external changes, remained the same. Cheerful, sensitive, attentive. Friends and colleagues often came to him, supported him, asked him to get well soon and get back on the job. Vera saw that these visits made her husband happy. He loved communication so much, loved being in the thick of things and being useful to someone. Even here, in the hospital, Fyodor managed to help those around him. He would roll a trolley with medicines to the nurse's post or help one of the patients to the toilet. Everyone in the hospital accepted him and loved him. Fyodor dreamed of getting well soon, returning home, and getting back to work. He was bored within the white institutional walls, but his strength was leaving him, and very soon his condition worsened so much that he could no longer get out of bed. Vera now went up to him herself to sit next to him, hold his hand, stroke his hair, and share the news of the day. Only a bone marrow transplant could save Fyodor. A complex and expensive operation. There were no problems with money. Thrifty Fyodor managed to save a tidy sum in his account, but the donor. It wasn't easy to find him, practically impossible. Your husband has a rare blood type, Professor Astafyev shrugged. A difficult case. It's hard enough for patients to find a suitable donor. And if the blood type is like that, what should they do? Wait, hope. I put him on the waiting list, but, frankly speaking, the chances that he'll wait are slim. When the talk about the operation first started, Professor Astafyev immediately asked to take compatibility tests of all Fyodor's blood relatives. The chances of finding a donor among your own are high. Brother, sister, parents, if they are still alive. I think the relatives will not be against becoming donors. The procedure, of course, is not from the pleasant ones, but Fyodor is from an orphanage, Vera said in a low voice. He doesn't know his relatives. At that moment, the woman desperately regretted that they had never been able to have a child of their own. Perhaps a son or daughter would have been a salvation for the father. Professor Astafyev, always calm and unperturbed, looked puzzled. Well, we'll look in other places. But the search was moving very slowly. There were several candidates ready to save a stranger, but they did not fit. There was less and less hope. Vera wiped her eyes and looked around. The hospital park was still empty. Tears brought temporary relief. The woman was about to leave. She still had to get home through the evening traffic jams, but poor Fyodor. A female voice came literally from around the corner of the building. Vera shuddered. For some reason, she immediately realized that they were talking about her husband. Fyodor was not a very common name these days. The woman carefully peered out from around the corner. It was a smoking room for the staff. Several comfortable benches with backrests, trash cans, a small babbling fountain. Now 2 nurses from the hospital were sitting on the bench. Vera recognized them. She often saw these nurses on the floor where Fyodor's ward was located. Middle-aged women were happily resting in the middle of a hard shift. After all, their jobs were clearly not easy. Yes, it's a pity about Fyodor, the second nurse agreed. A young man, such a good man, kind, but clearly not long for this world. Fading away before our eyes, and they certainly won't find a donor for him. Very rare indicators. Tears welled up in Vera's eyes again. She wanted to jump out of her hiding place and yell at these ladies who had so easily written off her loved one. Yes, he has no relatives, that's a pity, nodded the woman in the white coat, shaking the ash from the end of her cigarette. That's fate. I think I know someone who can help him. I'm not sure, but… Oh, come on, her interlocutor perked up. My in-laws live in Sosnovka, you know? And when we go to visit them, I often see a man there. He looks so much like our Fyodor, they're just the same face. Only Fyodor is a decent person, and this one is a total drunk, unkempt. A drunk, in a word. So I'm thinking, what if he's related to our Fyodor? Such a resemblance can't be a coincidence, can it? I keep thinking, should I tell someone about this or keep quiet? Keep quiet, of course. You're always making up things, and people will get alarmed, worried. They don't need extra trouble. It's hard enough as it is. Look, there's no face on his wife at all. Then the conversation moved on to other topics. What to cook for dinner, how to raise children properly. Should she plant a capricious variety of tomatoes at her dacha, or should she just stay away? Vera leaned against the wall to keep from falling. Her head was spinning again. Sosnovka. The name of the village was familiar to her. The thing is that a few years ago Fyodor decided to find his relatives. Why? Vera wondered then. Your mother left you in the maternity hospital. She didn't even take you home. She abandoned you, betrayed you. And now, suddenly, all successful and accomplished, you will find her. For what? So that she can squeeze money out of you later? You probably don't understand. Fyodor shook his head. It's so important to know your roots. What if, until the ugly truth about Fyodor's ancestors surfaced, he could draw all sorts of pictures in his head and come up with an excuse for his cuckoo mother? Now Vera heard the nurses mention the village of Sosnovka in their conversation. Fyodor's mother is from there. This woman remembered very well. And now it turns out that a man lives in Sosnovka, just like Fyodor. Of course, it is possible that this is a simple coincidence. But what if not? After all, it is quite possible that the woman who gave birth to Fyodor had other children. What if one of them remained in Sosnovka? For the first time since she learned about the terrible illness of her loved one, Vera felt a surge of strength. She had a cause, a goal. She would definitely go to Sosnovka and find out everything. And in any case, even if there were no longer any relatives of Fyodor in the village, now Vera had a plan. How come she hadn't thought of this before? Finding her husband's relatives, knowing his mother's details, would now be easy. And then all that would remain was to convince them to take a compatibility test. Offer these people money, after all. That evening, Vera went to bed in an elevated mood. Instead of tormenting herself with heavy thoughts and crying, she carefully planned her actions. Tomorrow she needed to take unpaid leave from work, then contact the detectives, give them the go-ahead to start searching again, and at the same time go to Sosnovka herself and find the man the nurse had talked about. The one who looked like her husband. Vera diligently drove away the thoughts that the nurse had lied for the sake of a catchphrase or had simply made a mistake. This couldn't be. All this couldn't be an ordinary coincidence. The woman felt it with some inner instinct. The next day was spent in bustle and preparations. Vera, how come she hadn't thought of this before? Finding her husband's relatives, knowing his mother's details, would now be easy. And then all that would remain was to convince them to take a compatibility test. Offer these people money, after all. That evening, Vera went to bed in an elevated mood. Instead of tormenting herself with heavy thoughts and crying, she carefully planned her actions. Tomorrow she needed to take unpaid leave from work, then contact the detectives, give them the go-ahead to start searching again, and at the same time go to Sosnovka herself and find the man the nurse had talked about. The one who looked like her husband. Vera diligently drove away the thought that the nurse had lied for the sake of a catchphrase or had simply made a mistake. This couldn't be. All this couldn't be an ordinary coincidence. The woman felt it with some inner instinct. The next day was spent in fussing and packing. Vera, how come she hadn't thought of this before? Finding her husband's relatives, knowing his mother's details, would now be easy. And then all that would remain was to convince them to take a compatibility test. Offer these people money, after all. That evening, Vera went to bed in an elevated mood. Instead of tormenting herself with heavy thoughts and crying, she carefully planned her actions. Tomorrow she needed to take unpaid leave from work, then contact the detectives, give them the go-ahead to start searching again, and at the same time go to Sosnovka herself and find the man the nurse had talked about. The one who looked like her husband. Vera diligently drove away the thought that the nurse had lied for the sake of a catchphrase or had simply made a mistake. This couldn't be. All this couldn't be an ordinary coincidence. The woman felt it with some inner instinct. The next day was spent in fussing and packing. Vera finished all the important things at work because she would be out of the office for at least a week. Went to visit Fyodor. The man could no longer even sit up in bed, but still found the strength to smile and wink at Vera. "You look special today," Fyodor said, looking at his wife. "Did something happen?" "I'm just in a good mood." Vera sat down next to him and took Fyodor's hand. He squeezed her palm weakly. "That's great. But I know you well. You've definitely got something in mind, right? Come on, admit it." Vera didn't want to give her husband hope ahead of time. And he couldn't worry now. No, he shouldn't know that Vera was leaving tomorrow morning to look for his relatives. "Well, I just had such a good dream. I wish you were healthy again, and we were going on a trip with the child." "A great dream," Fyodor praised. "I have dreams like that sometimes too. So it will happen sooner or later," Vera said confidently. The woman, of course, lied to her husband about her dream, but at night she really did see a beautiful dream. She and Fyodor were walking along a sunlit street, each holding a baby by the hand. The woman's heart was pounding with joy, with a feeling of endless happiness. It was a pity that the alarm clock had mercilessly torn Vera out of the world of dreams. The woman got up in bed. So, it was 6 in the morning, time to get ready. The train to Sosnovka left in an hour, and she still had to get to the station. Vera pulled on warm tracksuits and sneakers, put her hair in a casual bun, put a cap on her head so that the sun wouldn't bake her head during the day, threw the backpack she had packed the night before over her shoulders, and set off to meet the unknown. On the way, sitting in the train, Vera was thinking about what to do. But what if she saw a man who looked like Fyodor? And how to talk to him? What if he didn't listen to her, sent her far away, and that's it, took her for a crazy person? Yes, she had to act as carefully as possible, but at the same time boldly and decisively. The life of her loved one was at stake. Sosnovka turned out to be a large village. There was even a main wide street here, along which Vera wandered for a long time, looking around. The woman only now realized that she had made a mistake. She needed to go up to those nurses, talk to them, find out where exactly the man who looked so much like Fyodor lived. But at that moment Vera was too excited and agitated. Now she would have to look for this man herself. Vera had many photos of Fyodor on her phone, including pictures taken before her husband's illness. Perhaps she should show the photos to the locals. Ask where a man like her husband lived. Well, then, probably. They would probably have to tell this story. Otherwise, no one would help her. She didn't want to open her soul to strangers. So Vera spent several hours simply walking the streets of the village, carefully peering into the faces of the few passers-by. She was especially interested in men, but she hadn't met anyone like Fyodor yet. What are you walking back and forth for? Who are you looking for? A creaky voice came from behind Vera. The woman shuddered in surprise and turned around. An old man was looking at her, small, skinny, with a thick shock of gray hair and a short gray beard. This man's face was black from the sun. His pale blue eyes looked straight and attentively. What? Vera was confused. That, the old man retorted. It's been almost an hour already. I've been watching you. You came in the morning and you're wandering around here like a lost soul. Have you lost someone or something? You could say that. Vera didn't argue. And you? Do you know everyone here? Sosnovka. All of store is Ilov. And there are a lot of newcomers now. You can't remember them all, of course. Vera sighed and decided to trust this passerby. Because, well, what else could she do? She certainly didn't want to go home empty-handed. After all, Vera had placed such hopes on this trip. I'm looking for a man who looks like my husband. They say there's one like him here. Do you have a photo of your husband with you? With me. Vera smiled and showed the native an image of Fyodor on her smartphone screen. Well, we have one here who really does look like him, the old man said, looking closely at the photo. It's Sonka, Petrov. Petrov. Goosebumps ran down Vera's spine. Fyodor's mother's name was Larisa Evgenievna Petrova. Another coincidence. Although this surname, frankly speaking, is not uncommon, and yet, Vera was afraid that the old man would start asking about her, why she was looking for this man. But he showed miracles of tact, silently led the woman to the right house, and politely said goodbye. A slanted fence, an overgrown yard, something like an impromptu dump next to an outdoor wooden toilet, blackened with age. Broken bottles glinted in the sun in a pile of garbage. Vera carefully pressed the doorbell next to the gate, waited a bit. No one opened the door for her. Perhaps the doorbell doesn't work, because there was clearly someone in the house. Vera could hear the muttering of the TV, the clink of dishes. Then the woman knocked. First quietly, then louder. No reaction. Vera pounded on the door with all her might and almost fell right into the tall grass. Because the gate quietly opened. The gate was not in the maternity hospital, and then the boy ended up in an orphanage where he was raised. And now I've seen you. And, you know, even a DNA test is not needed here. You and my husband are just one person. Show me his photos again, the man asked. As he looked at the pictures on Vera's phone, his hands were shaking slightly, but his face remained impassive. Is it really him? Is your Fyodor really my brother? Did you have a brother? Vera desperately hoped that she was not mistaken, that this really was Fyodor's relative, who can save him from a deadly disease. My name is Alexander, the man suddenly said. We didn't introduce ourselves, I think. What's your name, Vera? Vera. What a good name. Rare these days. So, did you ever have a brother? Yes, Alexander nodded. Now I'll tell you the story. And the conclusions? We'll come to the conclusions later together, let's do it. It's not by chance that you ended up with me. Oh, it's not by chance. Sonia was the only man in the family. At the time when the fateful events unfolded, the boy had barely turned 8. And yet, he was already the only man in the family, which his numerous sisters constantly reminded him of. The girls exploited their brother. They made him clean, and he carried water from the pump in buckets, and he even learned to cook at the age of 5 or 6. There was no father in the family. In fact, there were many fathers for children living under the same roof, but no one was eager to raise and support their offspring. The mother herself probably did not remember who gave birth to her child. She had many gentlemen. Needless to say, Larisa Petrovna loved to have fun since her youth. This is what ultimately ruined her. The family lived in this very house where Alexander lived now. They slept in a heap, on whatever they could find, creaky narrow old beds, a stove, mattresses on the floor, or even just a fur coat or overcoat thrown into a corner. It was a matter of luck. The mother received benefits from the state, and that was how they lived, or rather, survived. Sometimes Larisa's numerous suitors helped. Who will bring the children potatoes? Who will bring meat? Who will bring milk? In general, the children lived in hunger, went to school in rags, froze in the winter, and did not see sweets even on holidays. Life was hard for many at that time, but people tried, stretched themselves, did everything to provide for their children. But not Larisa. She was not particularly worried about the difficult economic situation in the country, hunger and poverty. She fluttered through life like a bright, carefree butterfly. She perceived her children more as helpers around the house or neighbors. She rarely hugged them, did not treat them if someone fell ill, and, of course, did not protect the younger ones from the attacks of the older ones. "Sort it out yourselves, we don't need you to come along again," Larisa usually said if one of the children complained about the bullies. It was hard for Sangka to live in such an environment. A mother who was always drunk and overly cheerful, constant crowds of her guests in the house, the oppression of the older sisters. The girls, as it turned out, intended to follow in their mother's footsteps. Well, how could it be otherwise? After all, from an early age they had seen an example of such a life before their eyes. What else could you expect from girls who grew up in such a family? First, the eldest sister brought her husband into the house, a drinker twice her age. They had a child, benefits came in, the parting continued with a new scope. Then the second sister did the same. Sanka's life was becoming more and more unbearable. So many people in a cramped house, screaming babies, hunger, beatings from his mother and older sisters for unfinished work. "I already wanted to run away," Alexander admitted. "I was only 8, but I remember it very well. I thought I'd build myself a hut in the forest, live there in peace and quiet, eat berries and mushrooms. The main thing is, away from all of them." Only the little ones stopped him. Little nieces and sisters, who, Sangka knew, would simply be lost without him, especially his youngest sister, Siklenochka, who, like no one else, needed care and attention. And then it suddenly turned out that the mother was expecting another baby. The children usually found out about the upcoming addition by Lariska's belly when it could no longer be hidden. Yes, the woman did not even try to do this. She generally took her pregnancies lightly. But this time the new child was upsetting his mother in advance. "Why would we need another birth?" Lariska lamented, sitting in the kitchen with a cigarette. "There's not enough room as it is, and now a new parasite has appeared." Yes, the older daughters shook their heads sympathetically. It would be good if they at least paid good benefits for these brats, so that there would be something to suffer for. "But it's just pennies and nothing more. I'm not going to take the baby from the maternity hospital. I'll write a refusal, and that's the end of it." Little Sangka even choked on a crust of bread. How could that be? Refuse the child? Throw it away, or what? The boy had seen babies many times, both his nieces and younger sisters. He looked after them and understood perfectly well how defenseless and fragile newborns were. He was horrified by the very thought that such a little one would simply be abandoned somewhere. Alone, or what? His mother. "Come on, take the baby. I'll look after him." Sanka's request caused a fit of horse laughter at the table. "You don't understand anything yet, Finch." Lenka, the older sister's husband, gave Sanka a light slap on the back of the head. Sanka went out into the yard. For some reason, he was sure that this time his mother would give him a little brother. And the boy, who grew up surrounded by sisters, dreamed about it so much. He would teach his brother all sorts of manly things. Fishing, whittling wooden figures with a knife, climbing trees. They would understand each other like no one else. They would be inseparable. Songka would not then feel this chest-aching loneliness in a house full of people. Songka vaguely understood at his young age that it was impossible to live the way they lived. It was wrong. But he didn't have the strength to influence the situation in any way. It seemed to the boy that if he had a brother, they would cope with everything together. "Mom, don't leave the baby in the maternity hospital," Songka whined almost every day. Lariska reacted differently. If she was in a good mood, she laughed and joked. If she was in a bad mood, she could even slap her on the back of the head for being pushy. And Songka, he didn't know how to convey to his mother what he felt. Brother. He meant so much to him. "I still don't understand how I guessed then that my mother was expecting a boy," Alexander said, looking into the distance. "I just felt it. Or maybe I just dreamed about it so much." Their mother was taken away in an ambulance at night. The birth began in the midst of a stormy feast. At first, Lariska didn't even understand what was happening. And only later, when the contractions became so severe that they were impossible not to notice, she realized what was happening. One of the guests called an ambulance. They waited a long time. The mother was writhing in the corner. The adults were wailing, cursing the slow doctors. Someone was even preparing to deliver the baby themselves. There was a real commotion. Fortunately, the ambulance arrived on time. Larisa was taken to the maternity hospital. Songka still remembered the expression of disgust and contempt on the face of the woman in the medical uniform. "Why are you pregnant and drinking? It's easier this way," Lariska admitted honestly. "It's easier to endure all this dog's life. Aren't you afraid of harming the child?" "It's all a lie," Larisa waved her hand. "I've been drinking all my life, and my children are all healthy and beautiful." The mother was taken away. Songka knew that she would be back home in a week. This was always the case when she was taken to the maternity hospital. The boy was afraid that his mother would carry out her plan. Leave baby, won't bring him home, will abandon his brother. So long awaited, so already loved. Songka pestered his older sister Lidka with questions. "Lid, will mommy take the baby? Won't she abandon him?" "I don't know," sighed my sister. "For me, it would be better if she left him. We are so cramped. Where would we need another birth?" Songka cried in despair. The sisters, noticing this, immediately began to tease. After the allotted time, the mother returned home, thinner, fresher after a week without drinking, and with completely empty hands. "Hello, relatives. Finally I'm home. I'm tired of this hospital. You walk on eggshells, like in prison. We need to celebrate the return. Just invite Nikolai and the Semenovs with Lyuka." Songka looked at his mother and felt tears welling up in his eyes. She didn't take his brother after all. The boy rushed to his mother. "Where is my brother? Where did you leave him? Tell me, I'll find him, I'll take him." Larisa looked at her hysterical son with an ugly grin. For Songka, the absence of his brother meant the collapse of all his hopes and dreams. The boy, unable to withstand the tension, began to beat Larisa on the arms and legs with his little fists, wherever he could reach. Well, the woman roughly grabbed the child and pushed her son away from her. "What brother? I gave birth to a girl." "A girl?" Songka couldn't believe his ears. "What about your brother? Where is the girl then?" "She died," Lariska simply answered. Then she pushed her son away and went straight to the kitchen. "Is there anything to eat? She's hungry. It's just awful." Songka looked after his mother in confusion. "Yes, but my mother deceived me then," said Alexander, turning his gaze to Vera. "And I found out about it literally a couple of days later. My mother's friend, Aunt Klava, came to visit. They were sitting in the kitchen, drinking, of course, talking about life. And I heard it all. Maybe it was in vain that I left the little one in the maternity hospital," asked Aunt Klava, looking sadly at her friend. "What should I do with him, Klav? We sleep on each other's heads anyway. There is nothing to eat at home, and so, maybe someone will take him. He is still little. There are many childless people. Nature has rewarded me with boundless fertility. But still, there was a boy. He would have grown up. He would have become your support, your helper. And your Songka, look how he dreamed of his brother. You never know what he dreamed of. Tomorrow he will want to fly to the moon. So what? Should I urgently buy him a rocket?" Songka froze in the blue. He was looking after the kids in the yard. One of the nieces wanted to drink. The boy went into the house for water, but heard everything. So it means his mother lied to him. It means Songka really did have a brother. Only now they'll give him away to some orphanage. Or two other people, good ones. And this little boy, he won't even know that he has a brother who dreamed about him so much and waited for him so much. The boy cried then. From pain, from despair, from the impossibility of changing anything. Songka understood that it was useless to persuade his mother. She would never take his brother home. And maybe it was too late. Children for her were like an annoying misunderstanding. Several years passed. Songka's life was not sweet. His mother drank more and more, gradually losing her human appearance. Well, although she did not have any more new children, the older sisters gradually flew away from the nest in all directions. Soon the oldest of all Lariska's offspring in the house was Songka himself. He was already about 12 then, and the youngest sister Lenotchka had just turned 7. She was special, Lenotchka. She spoke poorly, did not always understand speech addressed to her. The village children teased her as a fool, and Lenotchka only smiled in response to these insults. That's how she was. Open, sincere, defenseless. She loved everyone around her. Everything in this world delighted her. Songka became attached to Lenotchka, and how could he not? He practically raised her from infancy, fed her, bathed her, and put her to bed. She would hug him with her little arms, put her curly head on her brother's shoulder. And Songka felt himself the strongest, the most beloved, almost omnipotent. The brother protected his little sister from teasers, looked after her. And he also looked after Lenotchka more closely than his other younger sisters. Because she didn't always understand what she was doing. She couldn't always recognize danger. He was worried about her. Her mother drank throughout her pregnancy, so the child was born sick. The neighbors gossiped. And Songka, he kept thinking, would his sister really be different, ordinary, like the others, if her mother had behaved differently? I wonder if Lenotchka would have remained so kind, open, and sincere. Songka always made sure that the gate in the yard was locked. Lenotchka often played alone near the house, where the boy had built a swing from a car tire and a sandbox especially for her. Songka rarely took his sister to the common playground. There was always someone who would call the innocent girl names, or even push her. Songka also taught his sisters to watch the gate, and the girls followed his orders diligently. None of them treated Lenotchka with the same warmth as Songka, but they still loved her in their own way. But their mother, it was useless to talk to her. When sober, Lariska still understood and realized everything, but as soon as she drank. Therefore, when his mother was drunk, Songka tried not to leave Lenotchka unattended. You never know. But on that ill-fated evening, the boy went to the store. He needed to buy bread and pasta, and the milk was gone. So he went. He left Lenotchka in the yard. There was no one at home. His mother was having fun at the Semenovs on the other side of the village. It was almost the same family as theirs. There was always moonshine in the house, and numerous children grew like grass in a field. Only the head of the family was there, which is why the Semenovs proudly called their family a full-fledged one. Songka knew that his mother would now stay there until the morning. She would come either late at night or at dawn. She would collapse right in the blue, or she would fall into a deep sleep on the porch. That's why the boy was calm about Lenotchka. Nothing would happen if she played in the fresh air in her yard. But his mother came earlier. The Semenovs had some kind of quarrel with someone. So the woman left her friend's house, proudly slamming the door. Of course, Lariska had already managed to properly fill her eyes. She didn't even think about the gate, although she couldn't help but notice Lenotchka in the sandbox. She left the gate open and went to bed. Returning, Songka immediately saw the door wide open. A terrible premonition squeezed his heart. He rushed into the yard. The landing was empty. He ran into the house, hoping that Lenotchka had gone to the kitchen. She loved to play with the dishes, but he found only his mother at the table. She was smoking, shaking the ashes right onto the tablecloth. In front of her stood an open bottle of vodka. "My son has come." Lariska grinned, seeing her son. He brought some bread. What a good boy. It will be just the thing for his mother. Where is Lena? There, in the sandbox, playing. Lariska waved her hand towards the window. She did not like her youngest daughter. The woman did not particularly burden herself with maternal chores, but if she was indifferent to other children, then she felt a real dislike for Lenotchka. The girl irritated her just by her appearance. "She is not there!" Sonka cried out in despair and rushed out into the street. Maybe he will be able to intercept his sister before she goes too far. Lenotchka never went outside the gate alone. Usually Sonka accompanied her. Less often Sveta, the eldest of the sisters who remained to live at home, walked with her. Lenotchka should not be left alone at all. She could behave unpredictably, get scared, or go somewhere dangerous. Neighbor Nina Vasilyevna noticed Sonka running around the village in a panic. She found out what was going on. She started gasping. She gathered people. Now a whole squad was looking for Lena. By evening it became clear that they couldn't cope on their own. So they called the police. The search lasted about 2 days. After the first day, people were already saying that it was unlikely that the child would be found alive. Sonka didn't even want to think about that. He reproached himself for not taking Lena with him to the store. But he couldn't even imagine that her mother would return so early. Then divers found Lena. The girl, apparently, went straight to the lake. Sonka often took his sister to the water. She liked to splash barefoot in the shallow water, build castles out of wet sand, and bask in the sun. Apparently, once outside, the girl remembered the place where she felt good and hurried there. Sonka watched his sister closely during such walks, never taking his eyes off her. He didn't let her go too deep. He stopped her. Lena didn't understand that it was dangerous, but she always obeyed her brother unquestioningly. But that time, Sonka wasn't there. There was no one to stop the girl. She went into the deep water and couldn't get out. And then a tragedy happened. It's so scary. Alexander couldn't calmly recall what happened even many years later. I still dream about it in great detail. The police came to our house and called us to the shore. I understood everything at once, but I still had hope. The mother had not been drinking for 2 days, as she was under constant surveillance by neighbors and the police, but she was not worried about Lena at all. She was irritated by all this fuss around her missing daughter. Seeing a crowd of people by the shore, Sonka rushed forward, and one of the policemen detained him. "No need, boy, don't look." But they let the mother in where something lay, covered with a colorful blanket. That was Lenotchka. After this incident, the guardianship authorities finally became interested in the family. Stern women with folders in their hands, police officers, and some other responsible persons began to drop by Larissa's house. Sonka heard words like unsanitary conditions, unsuitable living conditions, irresponsible mother from them. He did not really understand what was happening then. All his thoughts were occupied by the tragedy that had happened to Lenotchka. The boy reproached himself for what had happened. All she had to do was take her sister with her to the store, and nothing would have happened. But the mother seemed almost glad that her sick daughter had disappeared. Well, it's okay that it happened. Anyway, Lenka was a fool. She wasn't long for this world. These words of his mother drove Sonka crazy. But he kept silent, did not argue. He had long ago realized what kind of person his mother was. It was useless to explain anything to her. The intervention of officials ended with Larissa being deprived of parental rights. The children were sent to an orphanage. Sonka and Sveta ended up in one shelter. The younger girls were sent to another place. They were then quickly adopted. It seemed that some wealthy family took the sisters. The girls were taken to another city, and a completely different life began for them. Sonka really hoped that it was happy and carefree. Sonka himself liked the orphanage. Clean bedding, delicious food, good clothes, new shoes. Life immediately became easier. No late night parties in the kitchen. No huge list of household chores. Sonka was treated here, fed, and not particularly offended. Compared to life at home, this was a real paradise. For the first time, the boy felt like a child. Finally, Sonka got the opportunity to study. He was always interested in science, but at home he had almost no time for lessons. True, he never managed to get good grades. The boy's studies were too neglected. But his sister Svetlana liked the free life at home more. There, she went wherever she wanted, but here everything is according to the regime. Everything is on the line, her sister complained. She dreamed of breaking free as soon as possible. Time passed. Sonka and Sveta left the orphanage. By that time, their mother was no longer alive. She died. The brother and sister returned to their home, half-collapsed, old, and dirty. Songka honestly tried to establish a new life, but nothing worked out for him. He could not get a job, he has no education. He began to work part-time in the villages, weeding someone's garden, chopping firewood for someone. They often paid the guy with vodka. Well, and little by little he became addicted. It really does feel a little better once you've had a drink. Alexander shook his head. Bad thoughts disappear, and you don't think about your brother at that moment, or about Lenotchka, or about your mother either. Yes, Vera said, you've had a lot of losses and troubles in your life. That's for sure. Then the patter of small, light feet was heard on the porch. A moment later, a girl of about 8 ran into the kitchen, impossibly pretty, even in her old, shabby clothes that were too big for her. Clear green eyes, long, slightly disheveled blonde hair. The little girl looked so much like Fyodor that she could easily be mistaken for his daughter. Masha's back, Alexander beamed. The girl ran up to him, hugged him, and then stared at Vera and asked in a childishly direct manner, "Who is this? These are our guests. You'll meet them later. Go ahead, play in the yard a little more. We need to finish talking." "Okay," the girl nodded. "Then I'll go to the Nestrovs, okay? Katushka bought some new dolls, we'll play with her." "Go." Alexander nodded. Masha glanced at the guests once more and ran out into the street. This is your daughter. She's so beautiful. By the way, you look alike." "Niece," Alexander smiled. "Svetka's daughter." "Svetka." She followed in her mother's footsteps. She gave birth, but she doesn't want to raise her. So she left now, supposedly to earn money. And people say she has a new love in the big city. She drinks, goes out, doesn't remember the kids. And I look after Masha here as best I can. I'm not much of a teacher. Yes, it's still better than no one at all. How is that possible? Vera couldn't understand what she heard. How can you give up your own child? Well, easy. I'm telling you, Svetka is just like her mother. She doesn't need Masha. Just like our mother didn't really need us. She gets her allowance, and that's fine. Tell me about him, about your brother. I've dreamed of meeting him my whole life, but I never thought it was possible. And then, Vera told me. It was easy and pleasant to talk about her husband. The woman loved Fyodor and was proud of him. Alexander listened attentively. He was interested in everything. What Fyodor did, what films he liked to watch, and what he dreamed about. When can I see him? Even tomorrow, but so what? Do you agree to take the test? And if anything, become a donor. You're asking? Alexander exclaimed. That's not even up for discussion. As long as I'm a good fit. Thank you. Vera almost burst into tears of relief. This stranger, living in a village, in an old house, who had achieved nothing in life, he turned out to be so kind, so humane, so caring. It was very touching. Where should I go tomorrow? And at what time? Vera gave the address of the hospital. I will meet you at the main gate. Today I will warn the doctors. Everything will be ready. The next morning, approaching the agreed meeting place, Vera immediately noticed Alexander. She even felt a sense of relief. The woman was afraid that the man would change his mind or get drunk the night before and would not be able to get out of bed in the morning. But no. Alexander was at the gate before the appointed time, nervous, clean-shaven, neatly dressed. It was obvious that he had been preparing. Vera first took him to the lab. The doctors were already prepared for a not very simple procedure. When everything was over, Alexander asked if he could now see his brother. The man pronounced the word in a special way, with warmth in his voice, with hope. Yes, but I haven't had time to tell him about you yet, so get ready to be surprised. Fyodor felt a little better that morning. The new medications that kept his body alive seemed to be working well. He smiled broadly when he saw his wife. Hi. You're early today. I didn't expect to see you now. Hi. I have such news for you. I don't even know where to start. About 20 minutes later, Vera was sitting in the hallway next to her husband's room. Alexander was with Fyodor. Seeing them next to each other, the woman was once again struck by the similarities between brothers. They were brothers, there was no mistake about that. They were talking about something in the room now. They needed to talk, they needed to learn more about each other. Vera went out so as not to interfere and not to embarrass them. Vera was happy that Fyodor had found a loved one. Her husband dreamed of it, and at the same time was afraid of it. But Alexander, this man with a crippled childhood and a difficult fate, he is very kind and pleasant. Communication with such a brother will clearly benefit Fyodor. Now Vera prayed for one thing: if only Alexander would match Fyodor as a donor. The results would take a long time to wait, 3 whole days. These 3 days dragged on endlessly. Vera did not know what to do with herself so as not to think about the tests. Because if Alexander was not a match, it actually meant that everything was over for her husband. Alexander, of course, assured her that if anything happens, he will find his sister in Moscow and force her to take the test. But something told Vera that the unfamiliar Svetlana would hardly agree to become a donor. Perhaps even money would not help, and time would be lost. After Vera literally jumped for joy on the living room sofa for 3 days, Professor Astafyev himself called her in the morning and said that Alexander was the perfect donor for Fyodor. "We are preparing your husband for surgery." 2 years have passed since the events described. It was a difficult time. First, a serious operation, then a long recovery. Fyodor spent several more months in the hospital. Now not only his wife, her parents and friends visited him. Fyodor's brother often came to visit. Sometimes Alexander brought his niece Masha with him. Both Vera and Fyodor were very happy with the girl's presence. Fyodor recovered and returned to work. He was energetic and full of strength again. The first thing Fyodor did was arrange for his brother to be admitted to a private center to rid him of his pernicious addiction. At first, Alexander resisted. "Well, where would I go? I've been drinking all my life. It's hereditary for me. There's no help for me anymore. And who would I leave Masha with?" But Fyodor and Vera insisted and took the girl in for a while. Vera finally felt like a mother. She cooked delicious meals for Masha, went shopping with her, chose beautiful outfits for the little girl. Fyodor also spent a lot of time with her, helped her with her homework, took her for a walk in the park, taught her to roller skate. The 3 of them were happy, like a small, friendly family. Alexander suggested it. Once, when Fyodor and Vera came to visit him in the center, he, embarrassed and stammering, asked them a question. "Don't you want to formalize guardianship over Masha? Because her mother hasn't been interested in her for a long time. She's practically gone. And as for me, well, what kind of educator am I? A lonely, drinking man. The girl has become attached to you. She describes your everyday life to me with such delight." Of course, Fyodor and Vera were all for it. They had long dreamed of a child, and here she is, a ready-made daughter. The couple often talked among themselves about how hard it would be to part with Masha. But they could stay together. It was hard, but the couple managed it anyway. Svetlana was deprived of parental rights, which the woman did not regret at all. Masha's biological mother did not even come to court. She was informed about everything by letters and by phone. And, of course, Svetlana, who did not care about her own daughter, was not at all interested in getting to know her younger brother. "Well, that's what Svetka is like." Alexander shrugged. "She doesn't seem evil, but she is somehow carefree, irresponsible. She flutters through life, just like her mother." Staying in the rehabilitation center was good for Alexander. He got rid of his addiction and started a completely different life. Of course, his relatives, Fyodor and Vera, now helped him with this. "You do so much for me," Alexander sometimes said embarrassedly. "It's even awkward." "You actually saved my life," Fyodor reminded. It wasn't just me. It was Vera who found me. We both would have tried if it weren't for her." Fyodor got his brother a job at the same company where he worked. Alexander turned out to have golden hands, so the technical department was very happy to have him. "You should settle in the city, near us," Fyodor said more than once. "It's easier together." Alexander agreed with his brother. The man sold his country house. He transferred part of the proceeds from the sale from the branch. Everything as it should be. He used the other half for the initial payment on a mortgage. Alexander bought an apartment in the city. It was small, but how much space does a single man need? But in the house, next to the brother's house. Everyone was happy about this fact, especially Masha, who, of course, was very attached to the uncle who raised her. Now the uncle and niece could see each other every day. They often visited each other. You could say they lived in 2 houses. And of course, they celebrated all the holidays together. Fyodor finally found a family. He got a brother. Looking at Alexander and Fyodor, leisurely talking about something. Vera was happy. The brothers are together, despite everything. It's so great that they have each other. Vera was even a little jealous, in a good way, of course. She always dreamed of a sister or a brother, but her parents somehow did not dare to have a second child. And it's so great when you have such a dear person.